You are listening to Water Flying, a show dedicated to all things seaplanes. Brought to you by the Seaplane Pilots Association. My name is Steve McCoy. I'm the Executive Director of the Seaplane Pilots Association, which is the world's largest nonprofit advocacy organization dedicated to the protection and promotion of the water flying community. Climb aboard! We're about to start today's episode. Well, today we are joined by our first guest from a float manufacturer, Mr. Levi Guimond. Levi is the manufacturing engineer from PK Floats in Maine, and he's here to talk about float design and construction. And we might even have a big, exciting announcement later on in the show for a new product from PK.
Maybe if we're lucky.
Maybe.
So PK Floats has been operating since 1954, and they've collected quite a following as a result of their reputation for producing durable, reliable floats for seaplanes. So as a flight instructor myself, I'm flying on PK Floats. I can speak to that reliability firsthand. And I know Steve has experience flying on PK as well.
Oh, yeah. I love them.
So Levi, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today.
Hey, thanks for having me on your new podcast. For anyone not familiar with PK Floats, check out our website at pkfloats.com or our Instagram page.
Love it. And you guys have a great Instagram.
Well, thank you.
Of course. Yeah, I love the videos.
She's all over it. So,
the angles. They have such good angles for the videos. They have like a camera under the belly.
Yeah,
they've done really pretty cool stuff.
A lot of the stuff on our Instagram is actually customer photos that they send me. Just in day-to-day flying, they take pictures and they send them my way. And there's a lot of great shots.
Isn't that a great thing? That's a kind of beautiful thing about the environment with social media and everything, and it's just awesome. I mean, nothing better than having your customers being your best promoters.
It's true. It's true, and they're excited to fly on PK Floats because they like them so much, and so they want to share with other people. It's just free advertising. Yeah. So it's great.
Grow the flock.
So flying up in Maine, I know when I think of seaplanes, or when I used to think of seaplanes, my mind went immediately to, seaplane pilots up in Alaska, the bush pilots, flying down in the Bahamas, doing any saltwater operation. So it wasn't like flying in Maine as a seaplane pilot was the first thing that I would think of. So what is that community like up there as far as seaplanes go?
So Maine has over 6,000 lakes, and there's a very active seaplane community here. Before roads were built in the North Woods of Maine, which is the largest expanse of forest east of the Mississippi, that area was primarily accessed by float plane in the summertime. And that dates back to the 1940s. Now there's roads, but people are still flying float planes, mostly straight floats, but in recent years, more and more people are getting amphibs for the convenience of them.
Yeah, and I don't want to forget that Maine is the host of the largest seaplane fly-in in the world, the Greenville International Fly-in, or seaplane fly-in.
Right, that's right in the heart of seaplane, seaplane flying here in Maine, and everybody loves Greenville.
Yeah, it's amazing. If you have not been there, you need to put the second weekend in September is generally when it occurs. I think it's always, except this year with COVID. But second weekend in September.
It's always the weekend after Labor Day.
Yeah, which is awesome.
I just think it's cool that seaplanes were operating before you even had roads. So it really is, they're kind of, they have a big hold on the area. They were there before cars themselves. And so I don't think there are many areas that could say that.
Yeah, but I mean, you haven't been there yet. We're going to hopefully take the Super Cub there next year. But I mean, there's still a lot of the fish camps that I've gone to. Igor Sikorsky's place up there, it's 100 miles from the nearest paved road.
Wow.
So.
Yeah, and people will use, this area as their base, and they'll go 300 miles north into Canada and be in a very remote part of Quebec, which is, every bit as remote as flying in Alaska. And the fishing is probably just as good.
Yeah,
wow.
So, this kind of walks us into this next kind of question that I had. I know from experience operating seaplanes in Maine is very different than operating here in Florida. But talk about some of those challenges and some of those unique conditions in Maine.
Yeah, so we have a shorter season than you guys. Our season's about 6 months long. The ice will go out in April, around the middle of the month, and the water is still very cold. The more hardy seaplane pilots will start flying in April, but most people are beginning to fly in May and June when the water warms up a little bit. The wind and the weather always play a part of seaplane flying, no matter where you are. Here, you have to pay attention to the weather because the weather can change quite a bit over the course of the day. One of the biggest concerns is fuel. There's not a lot of places left to buy fuel on the water, so people will end up transporting their own fuel, and that's probably the biggest challenge flying float planes now in Maine.
So the planning that has to go into certainly, cross-country flights, but it has to be pretty extensive, I'm sure.
Yeah. And, there's some hard rock spines in the water and little things like that hide under the water and on the shorelines that can be pretty damaging to floats as well.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of shallow spots that could get you into trouble, whether it's ledge or rock, and you've really got to pay attention to the water and check the conditions before you land, because even the water level might change. This summer we had record drought, and a lot of people ended up hitting rocks.
Wow.
That in places that they had been before and had always been fine, but the water level's 2 feet lower than it ever was before. It changes a lot. You just got to pay attention. It's not like landing on a runway. The conditions are always changing. You just got to pay attention.
Certainly. Yeah, it's not a static runway. You just a little bit of pre-planning, a little bit of maybe talking to other people that have flown into that area, getting the conditions.
And I just love that. I mean, he just used one of our taglines. It's not like landing on a runway. That's right. It's much better.
That last part. I mean, other than the whole rock situation.
Except for the rock situation.
So, which I guess you can have on a runway, but it's just a little different.
So Abby and I have both flown your floats, and I can speak to the legendary durability of the PKs. Flying with Southern Seaplanes down there in New Orleans, or up in New Orleans for us. But, I mean, they just love the PKs because they have a real hardcore industrial kind of seaplane mission. And I know they've been super loyal and super fans of the PK floats over the years. And I've enjoyed flying them with them quite a bit.
So we kind of want to have an idea of what's your secret sauce? What makes the floats so incredibly durable?
The solid construction of the PK floats is what they're known for. The engineering that went into these floats in the 1970s and 80s followed through till today. They're a good design right from the beginning. It's a simple construction. There's no hydroformed part. It's all flat sheet metal construction. The V bottom shape is kind of unique to our float. We're the only ones that feature a variable dead rise bottom, which essentially is the float at the step area is a flatter V than at the bow. So as the float cuts through the water, the bottom is actually changing in shape as you go further back on the float. That really increases the performance of our float. When you combine that with the hydro boosters, which are the V-shaped aluminum extrusions riveted to the bottom of the float, it really makes a durable float bottom that also has really good hydrodynamic characteristics.
Oh, that's interesting. That's interesting.
And the floats are fully riveted. There's no flush rivets. They're fully riveted with upwards of 5,000 to 6,000 rivets in each pair of floats. We bond the aluminum skins to the stiffeners with 3M 5200, which is a very good adhesive sealant. Combine that with the rivets, and it just makes a very strong product overall. That's still lightweight.
So I know we had talked about this before, but I would love to hear more about it, and I'm sure the listeners would as well. So flush rivets, what is that?
So flush rivets were developed early on to make a more aerodynamic airplane. I think Howard Hughes developed that technology. It's great when you're trying to make a streamlined wing, let's say. There's no interruptions in the airflow around the rivet head. But for a seaplane float that has thin aluminum skins, it's hard to make a strong connection with a flush rivet. They look good because they're flush, but a full rivet that you can see the rivet on the surface is a much stronger connection in thin aluminum sheet metal, such as what a float is built out of. So our floats have very, very few flush rivets. They're only used where there might be interference with a landing gear component. And that just makes a stronger product that tends to look a little more traditional. It's what somebody would expect from an early float like an Edo, but it's a process that we've been using all along to build our float.
It ain't broke, don't fix it kind of thing?
Right. Edo patented riveted aluminum float construction in 1934, and when that patent expired in 1954 is when CK started.
They jumped on it. They were like, we're snagging this. We're adopting this.
It's a good idea, yeah.
So that is one of the things. Your floats are, we'll just say, they're a hardcore float, and they look like that. They're kind of the Carhartt jeans or jacket of floats, probably. So,
exactly.
And speaking of that, speaking of Carhartts, that kind of brings up Maine Fish and Wildlife and the way some of the government operations and people in your backyard are actually using these for government missions. What's that all about?
Yeah, so the state of Maine owns four or five pair of our seaplane floats. I know one pair they're still using has over 20,000 hours logged on multiple 185s. And these floats were built in the 70s for the state of Maine, and they're still using them.
That's amazing.
They've recently got some new pairs, but they have these older floats that are still airworthy, and they're still using them, and they're still every bit as dependable. And it goes on to the operators, the commercial operators that use our floats. They love them because they're just a tough, old, reliable product that they don't have to worry about cracking or delaminating or any other issues. They're just reliable when they need them.
Yeah. And you guys got some pretty diverse missions. I just want to kind of deviate for a moment and talk about some of the diverse missions that you guys are doing. And for us as an advocacy organization, it's always kind of important for us to not only establish what we're doing for the seaplane community, but for the non-flying and the non-seaplane community. And one of the things I've been fascinated, and I know your airplanes with your floats on have been used for, is the restocking of fish populations with the native fish populations. You have anything on that? Any insight on that?
Yeah, so back to the state of Maine aircraft, they outfit our floats with what they call drop tanks. They look like the old fuel tanks on the fighter jet. They're just an aerodynamic shaped tank. The top is open, and they're allowed to pivot, so they can dump the tank when it's full of fish. And they'll have a bottle of oxygen in the airplane that's piped down into the tank to supply oxygen to it's usually trout in Maine. So they'll land at a boat landing where the fisheries can't fill the tank up, and the pilot will take off, fly over the pond that would be too small to land in, because otherwise you would land in the pond and drop the fish. But they'll slow down to 80 miles an hour, and they'll hit a button in the airplane that releases the lock on the tank, and the tank dumps over, and the fish land on the surface of the water. And they have an exceptionally good survival rate because they've studied that, and it's an effective way to get fish into these more remote ponds that would otherwise be impractical to either hike the fish in or to fly them in with a helicopter, which would be 10 times as expensive.
So that's really amazing and everything.
She's giddy today. I don't know.
All I can imagine is someone walking along, it's a beautiful day out, and there's a seaplane that comes over, and all these fish are getting dropped out of this airplane.
Raining trout on them.
It honestly sounds like kind of an apocalyptic thing going on. There's trout falling from the sky. And all I can imagine, I'm sure they've had to do research and everything, pumping the oxygen in, or else you're going to be dropping a bunch of dead fish.
So here we're trying to have a good news story about how seaplanes impact the environment, and All Abby can do is think about the carnage that happens.
I'm just looking at Steve trying not to laugh because that's all I can imagine is just these fish falling from the sky. Oh my gosh. Wow, that is amazing though.
There you go. It's actually really good. So, invasive species, again, where I spend a lot of my time. So they'll go in and eradicate all the invasive species, and then they'll bring in the correct species and repopulate the ponds.
It's really pretty amazing. So I imagine it's the biggest compliment, the fact that the U.S. government recognizes your floats as a durable, long-lasting product that they can use. So I'm sure that's a huge compliment for you all.
It is. It always amazes me when any customer calls for parts support and they tell me what they have for floats, and it will be, it could be a float that's 50 or 60 years old. And I know just this summer, I had several parts customers putting floats on their airplane for the first time. They were 60-year-old floats that, are every bit as good as any of our floats out there. And they used them all summer long, had a great experience flying, for the first summer with their new pair of floats that are 60 years old.
That's awesome. I mean, just the fact that people can come back and say, oh, I bought a pair of floats from you guys for 60 years. Because I know the thing now is, you buy a phone and it's kind of designed to break in a year so that you have to buy a new phone. Then the next year you have to buy a new phone.
I'm going to get iPhone 12.
The iPhone 3000.
Yeah.
So good grief, it just never ends. So that's just amazing, the fact that you guys create a product like that.
So from a marketing standpoint, it's a bit of a challenge because if I sell a new set of floats to Steve today, he might never need another new pair again unless he buys a new airplane.
That's incredible.
So we're always looking for new customers, and a lot of our repeat customers are upgrading their airplane, and they have sold their old airplane on the float. So it's not like they're buying a new set every 10 years because the old ones wore out. If anything, they are just upgrading the airplane and putting, a new pair on their new airplane.
That's awesome.
Daggone you guys, you make them too good.
And your manufacturing team, so who you've compiled together to put these floats together for people, a lot of them are pilots themselves, correct?
Yeah, over half of the people that work here right now are seaplane rated pilots. And, I work here because I love aviation. I have a pilot's license and a seaplane rating, and I've owned several airplanes. And I enjoy getting to come to work at an airport and work on airplanes on a daily basis.
That's so interesting.
And I think that's the reason a lot of us work here is just because we love aviation, and that's why we do it.
Do any of you guys fly on PK floats?
Yeah, a couple of us here own PK floats, both straight floats and amphibs. I myself have owned Edos, and another gentleman here owns a pair of Edos for his Super Cub, and we're working on him to switch over to the newest float that we developed that we'll talk about a little later.
I think that was a chance for a shameless plug. Do any of you guys fly PK floats? Of course, all of us fly PK floats. Of course,
yeah, honestly. No, but I wanted to do my joke. Okay, so you guys are getting high on your own supply.
Another joke.
Come on, it's a good joke. You're getting high on your own supply. Because, you're flying, and so you're getting... Never mind. It's a terrible joke. I don't care. He wanted so badly to play this music, and I just wanted to tell the joke. So what kind of challenges do you encounter when designing or constructing a new float?
So the biggest challenge is keeping the weight down on the product. Everybody tends to want amphibs now. That's what we've noticed. And pretty much all we're going to design and build from here on out is going to be amphibs unless the customer wants straight floats. So we have to balance the cost of the end product with a lightweight product. And we can, balance that out along with durability to make a product that's affordable, that doesn't weigh, too much, and that will last a long, long time. And that's the biggest challenge, is to balance that equation. Several other challenges when designing a new product is how do you set that float up on a new airplane for the first time, figuring out the length of the strut so the CG of the airplane is located in the correct spot, the angle of the wing is correct to the float. And then some of the other minor challenges with building an aluminum float. Of course, everyone's concerned about corrosion. With the modern chemical etches and epoxy primers and adhesive sealants, anodizing, all of those go into building a float that will have a really good lifespan. And corrosion isn't really a concern with proper preventative maintenance.
I like that. We had a really good conversation earlier, and the whole idea that, the weight being the most important thing when designing and constructing a new float. Because what you said, you can create a float made of tin foil, aluminum foil from your kitchen cabinet, and charge nothing for it, but it's not going to be durable. It's just not going to be worth anything.
It's going to be light.
It's going to be light and cheap, but it's kind of like,
last.
You get to choose between these three things.
Everything's give and take.
So you guys have chosen the durability, certainly.
Yeah, if we built a float out of solid steel, it would be durable. It would last an eternity, but it would be too heavy to fly.
Right.
So when we choose a material for the float, it's based on the strength that's required. The engineer determines that. And, the people doing the marketing, they are setting the price based on what the consumer will, see as a good value based on what the competitors are charging. Our floats generally cost less than the competitors. And, all of this goes into our end product that's known for the durability that, we're not going to sacrifice durability for anything. That's what we rely on to sell our floats, is that reputation.
Certainly. And so it's really changed how I'm going to be thinking of floats from now on, between the durability, the weight, and the cost, if you're going between these three things. And it's just interesting how the different manufacturers work within, we have to have, certainly can't be too heavy, can't be, something that's going to fall apart in 6 months. So it's given me a different way of thinking of these floats.
And everybody pushes for the lightest weight possible,
right,
which is great. But for people who use their floats in the real world, they need that float to not let them down when they're in the remote wilderness with their family. When it counts, when you've got to get home and be safe in doing that. And at the end of the day, 10 pounds. Either way, 10 pounds lighter to sacrifice durability, or 10 pounds more for a float that will last 40 years. In my opinion, I want the float that's durable.
Certainly. Might save your life.
It might save your life. I have a customer that continues to buy parts from us from interior Alaska, and he had an engine failure over the tundra on PK floats. And when he impacted the ground, he thought he broke his back from the crack that he heard.
Oh, God.
Come to find out, he broke the seat in his Cessna 206. He hit so hard he broke the seat. The only thing he damaged on the floats was the spray rail that hit some brush. That's the only thing. They flew the airplane out with a helicopter, and he bought a new spray rail, and the float was back in service.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing, because I know that I have bent that spray rail tripping on it, and I think I've hit it with the little tractor that we use. So, oh my gosh, the fact that everything survived and he survived.
That's a pretty cool story.
That's an amazing story.
Yeah.
That's an amazing story.
So, I just have to say, getting back to that weight and performance trade-off and everything else, that's a topic that we're going to talk about in a future podcast, where we talk about the why you would choose an amphibious float over a straight float, and what the benefits and the cost and the drawbacks are of doing so. So that's going to be something we're going to talk about in the future. So I think it's time, because I'm just dying. I'm sitting in here and people are literally like texting me as we're recording this. They're wanting to know about this latest announcement of a product that you guys have. What's all this hype about? I mean, my phone, I think everyone's heard it. It's probably been like, people are texting me going, what's going on with PK?
We could incorporate it into the show.
Do I get a drum roll?
Ooh, that's good. We don't have a sound effect yet. Shoot.
So PK over the past year has designed and developed and built and tested a float that's specific to the experimental market, and it's specific to Super Cub type aircraft. So the Carbon Cub, the Legend Cub, all the home-built experimental Cubs that you see flying in Alaska and all over the U.S. It's an amphibious float specific for that style of airplane.
Wow.
And we built it in partnership with a local farmer that flies a Carbon Cub, and he just loves to enter it into the STOL competitions when it's on wheels, and he's all about performance. And he wanted a float for his airplane that was an aluminum float that was the appropriate size displacement for his airplane, and that had the qualities of a certified product. So we took everything we knew about building floats and started from a clean sheet of paper and developed this float that we call the 2050A. And so far, he's flown the airplane probably 75 hours on these floats, and it performs great.
Wow, 2050. So, I mean, when you put that on a Carbon Cub, that's literally like the perfect displacement for a Carbon Cub.
There's plenty of margin of safety with the buoyancy on this float. The Carbon Cub EX2 is a 1,865-pound airplane. The EX3 is a 2,000-pound airplane. It's the perfect size float for either of those sizes. The Legend Cub is a 2,000-pound airplane. Perfect for that.
Awesome. So meeting that FAA requirement and everything for the buoyancy.
It's based on the design that if it were to be a certified float, it would meet all the requirements. We're choosing to go the route of the experimental aircraft because it's one of the fastest growing segments of aviation.
No, it makes sense. Makes sense. Does the A stand for awesome?
It does. It also stands for amphibious.
No. It stands for
wow.
awesome.
We have Abby in an overly giddy mood today.
I had a lot of cake for lunch, so
yeah, I got to stop. I make coffee cake, and she's been chomping on that. So.
I'm just going to say the A stands for awesome. So that's just really amazing. You know, I've been following you guys on Instagram, and I know you're on Facebook. You guys are really active, and the STOL capability. I think you just had a post that came out, and it was, showing off the STOL capabilities of his Cub on the 2050 A's.
There's a little backstory to that video. Like I said, he's really into the STOL competitions. There's a whole Northeast circuit of these STOL competitions all through the summer, and he was at a STOL competition last weekend with the airplane, and he wasn't able to compete, because he's on the amphib float. And he really wanted to, they could see that it was bugging him. So they made a category just for amphibious float planes. And there were several amphibious float planes there. They made a category just for amphibs, and he went out, and that video was from his takeoff run.
It's a great video.
Wow. And you'll be able to see more of PK's and everyone's videos coming out on the Seaplanes Instagram that Abby is maintaining the account. She's our our communications director on social
Having
media.
a lot of fun. So Levi and I are both running our own accounts, and I'm following him. He's following us. So I'm trying to get us up to the standard that I know PK is at for their social media, because you guys are posting some really cool stuff.
We're a little bit behind the curve on social media, but it's how we're doing the majority of our advertisement now.
No, it
it's
makes
really
sense.
Great because so many people are connected with it, and the aviation community, as small as it is, it's a great platform for people to be able to share with other people across the country what's going on.
Yeah. Well, that's just awesome. So I have to tell you, I could sit here and have this conversation all day. But I think what we should do is try to get you back maybe for the Amphib Straight Float or some other conversations that we're going to have. And I just thank you so much for joining us. I always look forward to coming up to the factory and miss coming up to Maine to fly this year with COVID. And hopefully we'll get Abby up there with the Super Cub next year. We'll be looking forward to that. So we're excited to see what comes next from you guys. And thank you so much.
All right, thank you. We do have some more exciting news coming up. Hopefully we'll be talking about that in the springtime. And next time you or Abby are up in Maine, we'd be happy to give you a tour of the factory. But thanks for having me on the show, and look forward to maybe doing the show about amphib versus straight float.
Awesome. We are so glad you joined us today. If you like today's show, I highly encourage you to join the Seaplane Pilots Association and become a member of the largest seaplane community in the world. Members receive Water Flying, the only full-color glossy magazine dedicated to the seaplane community. And it's available in both printed and digital form. Your membership also includes access to the Water Landing Directory app, which has the Seaplane Flight School Directory and a calendar of seaplane events not only here in the United States, but around the world. The association hosts regular educational workshops, safety seminars, and gatherings for seaplane pilots and anyone with a passion for seaplanes. So look us up online at seaplanes.org, join our community, and support our mission of protecting and promoting water flying.